Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 29th of June of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Russian operation to isolate the cities of Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia from the mainland. We started discussing this situation several days ago when we noted that the Russians are focused to destroy almost every single gas station along the main supply lines that go in the direction of the city of Kharkiv. We're talking about the Dnipro-Kharkiv road. As of the previous 24-48 hours, the Russians, according to different sources, destroyed up to 10 gas stations along this line, which means that a fuel crisis is brewing, at least along this territory. Furthermore, the Russians today started attacking and destroying gas stations along M03 road that goes from the city of Kharkiv in the direction of the cities of Kremenchuk and Kiev. As of the previous 24 hours, 2 gas stations were destroyed. It was recorded, and we have videos and pictures about this. So as you can see, the Russians started with gas stations that are located in the area of the city of Kharkiv, but most likely the Russians will continue. And the Russians began destruction of gas stations between the cities of Sumy and Kharkiv. As for these gas stations, the Russians began destroying them probably several weeks ago, basically at the beginning of this fuel war. So these gas stations were the first gas stations that the Russians began attacking and destroying. No, the first gas stations that the Russians began attacking and destroying were gas stations through the northern parts of Ukraine. We're talking about Chernihiv and Sumy region. And when the Russians destroyed enough of gas stations, they shift their focus in the direction of the cities of Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia. Now these 2 cities are the main target for Russians, and as we discussed during the previous videos, the most important task of Russians is to isolate the city of Kharkiv before winter comes. And when winter comes, I can't even imagine how exactly the Ukrainians are going to handle with this situation. Another important thing is that roads are not the only logistic that the Ukrainians use for the city of Kharkiv. There are also railways that goes from the city of Kharkiv in the southern direction through the settlements of Zlatopillia, then further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Lymanovka, Lozova, and then further in the southwestern direction towards the city of Pavlohrad, and then further in the western direction towards the mainland or the western parts of Ukraine. So this line was also attacked by Russians during the previous 24 hours. We received lots of updates on this matter. In this video we can see the city of Pavlohrad, and as you can see, as a result of attack, most likely a warehouse was destroyed, and as a result of the secondary detonation, this ammo depot was completely reduced to ruins. As of the settlement of Lozova, here we have this video, and here we can see that the Russians were attacking an object of energy infrastructure. Most likely the Ukrainians used this substation for the railway services in this area, and the settlement by the name of Zlatopillia. Here we have just reports that the Russians were attacking this territory with missiles, and as of the end of the 29th of June of 2026, we don't know for sure what exactly the Russians were attacking, but the most important idea that the Russians were attacking objects along the main supply lines. The Russians are tasked to isolate the city of Kharkiv before winter comes, and most likely the Russians will finish this process much faster. At the same time, the Russians continue attacking warehouses on the territory of the city of Kharkiv. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians destroyed a big warehouse in the most northwestern parts of the settlement. Here we have lots of videos and updates on this matter. During the day, the civilians of the city of Kharkiv published lots of videos on this matter, black smoke over the settlement, and later the epicenter of this attack was geolocated, and this is basically the most northwestern base, the most northwestern warehouse of the city. And here we have videos from this area. So here we can see civilians moving along the Kharkiv ring roads, and they were filming the situation around this base, around this warehouse. As a result of attack, this warehouse was destroyed, and furthermore we have videos where we can see how exactly the Russians were attacking this territory. These videos were published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see what kind of weapons the Russians were using and what kind of damage the Russians managed to deal. Of course, every everybody has a question. So if the Russians destroy and have destroyed so many gas stations through the eastern parts of Ukraine, through the southern parts of Ukraine, and we see no fuel crisis on the territory of the eastern parts of Ukraine, we don't have reports, we don't have lines, we don't have problems between people like we have videos from the territory of Russia. I believe that everyone has seen lots of videos from the territory of the Russian Federation where sometimes real fights for gasoline or fuel is taking place on the territory of this or that gas station. And this is a very important question, and I think that have an answer to this question. You know that when the oil crisis started, more precisely when the fuel crisis started on the territory of the Russian Federation, basically fuel crisis started almost at the same time on the territory of Russia and on the territory of Ukraine, with several differences. The Ukrainians were attacking oil bases and oil refineries, and the Russians started attacking gas stations. So the question is why there is a crisis on the territory of Russia and why there is no crisis on the territory of Ukraine. So two probably explanations about the situation, and the first one is when the oil crisis started on the territory of the Russian Federation, the Russians ordered, the Russian authorities ordered not to use the military fuel and the military gasoline for the civilian purposes. So this is the first thing that the Russians did when the oil crisis, fuel crisis just started. They ordered not to use fuel of military for the civilian purposes. So this is the most important step that was made by Russians. As we can see, the Ukrainians haven't done similar, which means that most likely now civilians through the eastern parts of Ukraine, through Sumy region, Kharkiv region, and many other regions along the line of combat contact has fuel, access to fuel, but to military fuel. So most likely commanders of different squads, of different groups sells this fuel to civilians, and this allows the stabilized situation. So from the first side, we see that maybe these actions from the Ukrainian side allow the Ukrainians to stabilize the situation and to stop not to stop, but to postpone the fuel crisis. But at the same time, we understand that if the fuel crisis continues, if both the Russians and the Ukrainians continue attacking and destroying gas stations and objects of energy infrastructure of each other, this will lead to the situation when the Russians will be able to save the military deposits of fuel in comparison with the Ukrainian side, because they will not be able to do this, because now the civilians use and the military and civilians use the military warehouse, military fuel depot. So this is probably the first situation. The second one is that the Russians right now are interested, the Russian authorities, in rising the fuel prices. Now we see the oil fuel crisis on the territory of Russia, but the most important consequence of this fuel crisis on the territory of Russia is that oil prices, fuel prices, gasoline prices for Russians are growing. And you know that the Russians have the minimal fuel price through the entire Europe, or they used to have. Fuel prices on the territory of Russia probably 3, maybe 4 times cheaper than on the territory of Europe, and much more cheaper than on the territory of Ukraine. And due to the fact that the United States of America has adopted sanctions or prolonged sanctions against the Russian oil, so this means that probably the Russians are trying to find the inner resources, how to finance the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and they're going to do this partially by increasing the oil price and fuel prices for civilians. So this is one of the options, probably what the Russians are trying to achieve with the current situation that we can see right now, which means that sooner or later the fuel price crisis on the territory of Russia will end. Now let's move further. During the previous 12 hours, according to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, the Russians used 108 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and as we discussed, the Russians were mainly attacking gas stations, and the Russians were attacking oil bases. And during the previous day, we received lots of videos on this matter. In this video, we can see another oil base through the central part of Ukraine that was destroyed by Russians. Furthermore, we received a report that as a result of Russian attacks, currently there are no more gas stations on the territory of the city of Nikopol. The Russians have destroyed every single gas station on the territory of the city, and this information was reported by local authorities and by the local sources. They stated that today officially the last gas station on the territory of the city of Nikopol was destroyed, and there are no more gas stations. And probably within days we will receive more and more updates on this matter. Another important thing is the city of Zaporizhzhia, because the city of Kharkiv Kharkiv is not the only city that the Russians are trying to isolate from the mainland. Now we see that the Russians are doing the same thing with the city of Zaporizhzhia. During the previous days, the Russians were attacking gas stations through the western parts of the settlement, and as of the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked these energy lines. These are very important energy lines that connect the eastern and the western parts of the city of Dnipro, and the Russians attacked this territory with drones, and some sources reported that the Russians attacked this territory with bombs, and as a result of attack, power outages occurred through several regions of the city of Zaporizhzhia. So, and the most important thing, that if Russians destroy these facilities, this equipment, then it would be very difficult for the Ukrainians to repair it. It's going to be very difficult, probably impossible, because Russians have access to this territory with drones, and if the Ukrainians bring engineering equipment or vehicles, the Russians will obviously attack these vehicles immediately, which means that most likely the Russians will continue the process of isolation of the city of Zaporizhzhia before the beginning of the major Zaporizhzhia battle, which according to the Russia's plan is going to happen. It's going to happen either in the end of the 2026 or during the 2027s. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, not so many changes were recorded. Probably this situation is connected with the heat that is currently taking place through the entire Europe. It's impossible sometimes to carry out any offensive operation under such a pressure, so that is why we don't see significant changes. We just see lots of strikes carried out by Russians with drones, but without changes on the ground. In this video we can see the Russians were bombing the city of Preobrazhenka, and from the other side the group of forces is published a video as the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Bohodarivka. This village is located right in front of the settlement of Pokrovsky and Alexandrovka, and which means that most likely tomorrow or the day after tomorrow the Russians will confirm Russian control over the settlement of Alexandrovka, and of course if it happens then this situation means that the battle for Pokrovsky begins. The Ukrainians have evacuated the territory further to the north in advance from this area, and the Ukrainians most likely are ready to meet the Russians. Let's wait and see what is going to happen next, because the village of Pokrovsky is located on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha, and if Russians capture the settlement, this is going to be a very big problem for the armed forces of Ukraine. The cities Konstantinovka and Lyman. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just lots of videos of how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Probably the most important updates are the updates that were made by the President of Russia. Yesterday in the evening, he reported that by the end of the 28th of June of 2026, the Russians had captured 96% of the city of Konstantinovka, and the Russians continue advancing. Due to these numbers, we believe that in coming days, the Russians will make a final announcement. And the same story about the city of Lyman. Yesterday, the President of Russia stated that Russians, there are just 143 buildings left before Russians establish complete control over the city of Lyman. 143 out of 11,000, which means that the Russians captured the city of Lyman for 99.99%, and the Russians continue advancing. And this also means that in coming days, the Russians will announce complete control over the territory. As for the upcoming days, today several pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the United States of America reported and told Zelensky and the Ukrainian authorities that in coming days, within the next 72 hours, the Russians will carry out probably not even a massive attack, but probably something like a mega attack on the territory of Ukraine, because the previous massive attack took place between the 14th and the 15th of June of 2026, so almost 20 days will pass since the beginning of the previous massive attack, which means that the Russians, by the next mega attack, would be able to concentrate more than 2,000 of drones. And the question is whether the Russians are going to use all these 2,000 of drones and what kind of targets the Russians are planning to attack. The Russians have lots of options. They can attack military facilities, or the Russians can use these 2,000 of drones to attack every single gas station through the central part of Ukraine. And if Russians destroy every single gas station during the next mega attack, this will lead to complete collapse of energy and fuel infrastructure of Ukraine. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.